Well, today we're going to kick off our new weekly series, Flashpoints, with our national security analyst, Juan Zarate, where we're going to take a close look each week at the top and then the below-the-radar stories in the world of foreign policy. This week we're going to wrap up the nuclear summit, tougher sanctions on Iran, the revolt in Kyrgyzstan, and the mysterious sinking of a South Korean warship. Juan, let's start with the summit.
Let's do it, Bob. President Obama, I think, succeeded this week in getting the world's attention on an issue that he thinks is critical, and I think is critical from a security perspective. 47 world leaders were here to talk about proliferation and the opportunity to lock down nuclear material so that terrorists can't get their hands on it. The president not only got a communique and a work plan, the kinds of things you usually get from these diplomatic engagements, but he got some real-world commitments from the Ukrainians, from Mexicans, to actually get rid of some of this weapons-grade material. This is important, and he used a lot of capital here. You only get so many bites of the apple bringing that many world leaders to Washington. And so I think that was an important event, and we'll see what happens from it.
The latest news on Iran sanctions, and that is that Brazil seems to be going with China and India in their attitude that maybe we don't want tougher sanctions. Where does this all come out?
Well, the Iran sanctions issue is complicated. It's a mixed bag, I think, and I think it's trending badly for the administration, actually, because with this Brazilian statement, what you have is a reinforcement of the notion that both they're not in favor of sanctions. Brazil sits on the UN Security Council along, obviously, with China and Russia, but also that the haggling is going to be all about the sanctions and getting the sanctions. And I think we actually take a step back in that regard. We already have 3 sanctions against Iran, and the fact that we're haggling this hard over another sanctions is really problematic. That said, Bob, the good news is that a lot of the action on the financial pressure on Iran is happening as we speak. The private sector is actually pulling out of Iran quite dramatically. Petroleum firms, insurance firms. Just this week, a Malaysian petroleum company has pulled out. And so this is happening under the radar screen, and this is important because it's starting to hurt the Iranians.
Kyrgyzstan. You know, I'll have to ask you the famous city editor's question when you work at a newspaper. You come back when you're a young reporter, and the editor will always say to you, why should I care about this?
Yeah.
Why is this important to Americans?
Well,
or is it?
Well, I think so. Kyrgyzstan is important for 2 reasons. One, the U.S. has a very important base there called the Manas Air Base, which is a logistical hub, very important for our activities in Afghanistan. 2, Kyrgyzstan has in some ways become a proxy battle between Russia and the United States in terms of influence in Central Asia. And so both influence over whether or not the U.S. would actually have a base and the question of whether or not the U.S. or Russia would be seen as preeminent is very important in Kyrgyzstan. And so I think we've averted a crisis with the step down of the president, the overthrow, and now the hard work of diplomacy is underway. And you see the United States sending diplomats into the country. You see the Russians trying to influence with aid to Kyrgyzstan. And so all of this is going to play out. But the key for the United States is keeping that base open.
All right, and then the one that didn't get all that much publicity, South Korea. It's believed that the ship, a South Korean ship, was hit by some sort of a bomb or something. Is there a possibility of involvement by North Korea?
Well, that's the million-dollar question in this investigation that the South Koreans have, Bob. And this is one of those stories that we have to keep a very careful eye on because the South Koreans have launched this investigation based on the sinking of the vessel in late March. It's not clear what caused it, but the leading theory is that it was either a torpedo or a mine laid by the North Koreans. And the question is, if the South Koreans, who have opened this investigation to the international community, conclude that the North Koreans were involved, what do? They can't appear weak, but they don't want to start a war. And the U.S. has an interest in making sure this doesn't flare up.
So what do we do?
Well, I think we act as a diplomatic calmer for the situation. I think we help with the investigation. We see where it leads. But we try to make sure that it doesn't escalate in a way that is uncomfortable for not only the people in the region, but also for the United States.
All right, Juan Zarate, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob.